As I said earlier, we start Palm Sunday in one state of mind, and then we end Palm Sunday in another. So Palm Sunday begins with what I said was the litany of the palms. Now, certain churches, like the church that I went to in Colorado, we would start that Sunday service actually in our, what we call the parish hall, basically it's our fellowship hall. And the congregation would gather down there, and then the readings that we did at the beginning, we would do in the fellowship hall. And we would all have palm branches, so not just the kids, but everyone would be down there. And you would have these readings, and then you would start singing All Glory, Laud, and Honor, and we would do a procession out around the courtyard into the sanctuary. So it wasn't just the kids walking around, that's sort of our version of it that works really well, but the whole congregation would join in this procession of palms to celebrate Jesus' triumphal entry into Jerusalem. And so you start the service that way, and then you have this transition where you're all of a sudden, at the end of the service, which we are doing today, we hear the Passion narrative, and we're reminded of what is beginning today and ending on Good Friday. So that's the sort of dichotomy that we have to deal with today. That we have this Palm Sunday celebration, which was a great day of festivity where people were joyously walking into the city and celebrating. And then the week ends on Good Friday with Jesus' crucifixion. And no one who was with Jesus on Palm Sunday, whether they were really invested in him or not, whether they were just joining in the fun of walking together into the city, no one imagined what would happen at the end. But all along that, Jesus knew. And so when we think of trying to put these ideas together, we see that Jesus all along knew what was happening on that Palm Sunday, or that entrance into Jerusalem, was the beginning that would end where it ends on Good Friday. And so these two ideas, these two different emotions come together in Jesus. So let's take a look at this story again from Matthew chapter 21. If you want to follow along, it's 1405 here in the Pew Bible. It will be on the screen, but we're going to look at this passage about the entrance of Jesus into Jerusalem. It's one of the most important stories in the life of Jesus, and it's one that sometimes is difficult for us to really grab a hold of. But when we look at it, what we see is that Jesus' entrance indicates that there's something different about him. Jesus' entrance indicates that there's something different about him. But the question we need to ask ourselves is, well, what's different? So let's take a look at this passage from Matthew. This is how Matthew starts the story. As they approached Jerusalem and came to Bethphage on the Mount of Olives, Jesus sent 2 disciples, saying to them, "Go to the village ahead of you, and at once you will find a donkey tied there with her colt by her. Untie them and bring them to me. If anyone says anything to you, say that the Lord needs them, and he will send them right away." So Jesus is traveling. Now, the context that we don't get until later, at least for us because we're jumping in 21, is that Jesus is traveling with a group of pilgrims to Jerusalem to celebrate the Passover festival. Now, if you think about the Passover festival all the way back in the book of Exodus, there's that story of the final plague whenever the Jewish people had to have this meal where they had a lamb that they killed, and they took the blood and they put it over their doorposts, and then they ate the lamb, and then they were passed over. As in the curse of the firstborn did not affect any family who had the blood of a lamb on their doorpost. It wasn't just the Jewish people, but only the Jewish people did it. And then ever since then, the Israeli people have celebrated Passover, when they are remembering when God saved them from slavery. And so what that looked like in Jesus' day was people, if they could, would travel to Jerusalem. You would go on a pilgrimage. You would start with a group of people. Now for Jesus, he wasn't that far from Jerusalem. So him and his family and their village and their extended family would all walk together to Jerusalem to celebrate the Passover. And so every year, people would be filing through these towns. I've shown you that route before. They would come down and go across the Jordan River. Then they'd come up through Bethany, where we heard last week, where Lazarus lived. And they would go through the Mount of Olives, and then they would come into the city right there by the temple, and they would celebrate. And so this was the normal trip. But Jesus this year wants to do something different. People did not normally make pilgrimages on donkeys. They walked. But Jesus wanted to do something different. So he tells his disciples, I want you to go ahead of us to the village coming up, and I want you to grab a donkey and her colt that are tied there. And he said, I want you to bring them to me. So Jesus wants to do something unexpected on this journey into Jerusalem. Something that would not have been what anyone expected. Now the question is, well, why would Jesus want to grab this donkey? Why would he need it? And this is what Matthew offers in verse 4 and 5. He says, this took place to fulfill what was spoken through the prophet. Say to daughter Zion, see, your king comes to you, gentle and riding on a donkey, and on a colt, the foal of a donkey. So Matthew, trying to understand what Jesus is doing, and Matthew does this throughout his gospel, he is looking for ways to plug the story of Jesus into the Old Testament, into the scriptures of his people. So Matthew is thinking through the scriptures that were a part of his life, that were part of how he thought about the world, the very fiber of his being. And he's like, okay, there's this story from Zechariah, this passage that says this, Zechariah 9:9. Rejoice greatly, daughter Zion. Shout, daughter Jerusalem. See, your king comes to you, righteous and victorious, lowly and riding on a donkey, on a colt, the foal of a donkey. So this Zechariah passage is in Matthew's mind. And this passage was also about the coming Messiah. As I talked to the confirmation students today, even though the people of Israel had been exiled and they had been judged because of their rebellion, the prophets had this hope of a day when the king of Israel would return, and it would be from David's line, but it would be God's appointed Savior to deliver them. And so this Messiah figure would come. And now Jesus and Matthew, they plug Jesus right into this idea. And Jesus is going to make the statement about who he is by riding this donkey. Because he knows that when people see him riding it, they're going to have this passage in their mind. And so Jesus wants to make this statement as he rides into Jerusalem. From the outset, Jesus wanted people to notice he was doing something different. He wanted to make a statement. Jesus' entrance indicates that there was something different about him from the beginning on that day. Now you got to remember, Matthew's gospel, Jesus hasn't been to Jerusalem yet. This is his first time coming. So he's entering into the city, and he's going to enter into the city on a donkey. He wants to make a statement about himself. Jesus' entrance indicates that there's something different about him. Now, before we talk about what's different, do the disciples manage to get this donkey? This is what happens here in verse 6. The disciples went and did as Jesus said and instructed them. They brought the donkey and the colt and placed their cloaks on them for Jesus to sit on. So yes, they get the donkey. Now, in a couple of the other gospels, or maybe just Luke, I can't remember, I didn't look at the details. There is somebody who says, why are you taking that donkey? And Jesus had already given them that answer. They give the answer. It's sufficient for those people. Jesus takes the donkey. He's going to ride it. They've got it ready, and they get their cloak on there. So Jesus is ready to make this step. Remember, he's doing all of this to make a message about himself. Jesus, his entrance indicates that there's something different about him. So we know who Jesus is. We've already seen all of this. We've already heard these stories before. But when we're telling this story, when we're reliving it, we enter into the people who were on that road that day. Remember, they're under Roman oppression. They have no hope. They're waiting for this messianic figure that they're not sure about. And here comes Jesus. He gets this donkey, and he's going to ride the last couple of miles into Jerusalem with everyone walking next to him. Jesus' entrance indicates that there was something different about him. So he gets the donkey. Now what's going to happen when he rides? Now I know we already read it, but let's take a look at it again. A very large crowd spread their cloaks on the road, while others cut branches from the trees and spread them on the road. Now we need to understand that as far as we can tell from, when you read scholars, they're pretty sure that this sort of thing was actually normal for welcoming the pilgrims. Because what would happen is the pilgrims would be coming, they would be on this one road. That's the road you took if you're coming from the north. And so the people who lived along that road, close to the city, when the people started to come, they're all Jewish people, so they would come out and they would start to welcome their fellow brothers and sisters, their fellow Jewish men and women, to celebrate with them. And so they would get these cloaks, they would start to wave palm branches to celebrate the arrival of the pilgrims, because they're all preparing to celebrate together. So this is pretty normal. But what is not normal is what happens next. Before we read that, I want to paint a picture for us. So if we think about the 4-H Fair Parade, I know most of us have probably been to the 4-H Fair Parade before. If you haven't, think about any parade you've ever gone to. Parades work a certain way. People line up along the streets. Now, if it's a 4-H Fair Parade or also one of the downtown Decatur parades, people start to put their chairs out even a week early. And then on the parade night, everyone comes and they stand along the side. So it's normal at a parade to see people standing and having a good time, doing whatever parade people do. I mean, you just basically watch and you try to get candy, I guess. I don't know. So that's what's normal. So this part of the pilgrimage is normal. But what happens next is the part that no one expects. In verse 9, the crowds that went ahead of him and those that followed shouted. So this is the people walking with Jesus. Hosanna to the Son of David. Blessed is he who comes in the name of the Lord. Hosanna in the highest heaven. So with these shouts, the pilgrims walking with Jesus, but then I imagine even the people lining the streets, start to hear this shout about the Son of David. Now remember, the Son of David is a person who would come to be the rightful king of Israel. So the Son of David is coming. Jesus is being identified as that Son of David because he's making this ride on the donkey. And then they say, blessed is he who comes in the name of the Lord. Now, the one who comes in the name of the Lord is the Messiah, the anointed one on God's behalf. That is also something that was talked about when the Messiah would come. But also, it's associated with this idea that one day God would return to Jerusalem. That Yahweh would return to be with his people. And now Jesus is coming on the donkey to Jerusalem, and people start to welcome him back to the city. So for the Jewish people there today, on that day, it's not just a normal parade. So parades are, even the 4-H Fair Parade, I remember walking in that parade for people who are running for a local office. It's not uncommon in parades to see some politicians walk, right? And if you know the person, you might wave to them. They hand out candy, they hand out flyers. But now imagine if we had a parade, and I mean, it's almost no politician you can pick today because everybody, you either like them or you don't. So I'm not going to use the president, but like if we had our governor who decided, I'm going to go walk in the Adams County 4-H Fair Parade as part of my re-election bid. Well, why he would do that, I don't know. But I mean, I'm sure that they do some of that stuff still. So imagine how more exciting that could potentially be. Now, I remember back when Mitch Daniels was governor, he came to Adams Central and spoke because we were one of the couple schools that were 4-star in all 3 of the schools. So Mitch Daniel came. I remember we were a bunch of high schoolers. I mean, we don't care about the governor. But it was still a big deal because this important person we'd seen on TV was coming to our school. And then also some kids did have some hard questions for him that he probably was like, I don't want to answer these. But anyway, it's a celebration that you're not used to. So Jesus all of a sudden creates this scenario on the pilgrimage where it's not just a normal parade. It's like the president or a really important politician walking in the parade, and all of a sudden people are like glued to that person. They start walking with them. They start to chant, re-elect this person, whatever you want to say. And it's this great party. That's what we're talking about here. Jesus in his decision to come on this donkey, creates a situation no one expected. Jesus' entrance indicates that there was something different about him. And that difference was he was claiming in that moment to be the Messiah. He was claiming to be the Messiah returning to Jerusalem on behalf of God. So a very, very important moment in the lives of the Jewish people. This is Jesus' claim. And when he gets to the city, this is what Matthew tells us. When Jesus entered Jerusalem, the whole city was stirred and asked, "Who is this?" So not only do the people along the road and the pilgrims who are with Jesus have this celebration, but the whole city starts to hear about something that happened on that day. And they're like, "Who is this person?" Now remember, Jesus hadn't been to Jerusalem yet, so this is their first, in Matthew's gospel, first introduction to him. John has Jesus in Jerusalem a number of times. But for Matthew, this is when Jesus gets to be introduced to Jerusalem. And this is what the crowd says. "This is Jesus, the prophet from Nazareth in Galilee." So no one says that Jesus is the Messiah, but they do call him a prophet. But remember, prophets do things to symbolize a message. And for Jesus, he is being a prophet in that moment. He is doing something to proclaim something on behalf of God to the world. And he's doing it on his own behalf. When he does that, he is prophetically saying, "I am the Messiah, coming to take my place as the rightful king of the world in my city." But what happens, Jesus comes on Monday, and what happens on Friday, right? The Jewish people reject their Messiah. They reject their king, and instead, they have him crucified. But it all starts with Jesus coming into the city. And Jesus' entrance indicates that there was something different about him. So we enter Holy Week with Jesus, a great celebration. And Jesus' arrival makes this statement about himself, that he is someone special, that he is the Messiah. But we know what's ahead. We know what's coming. And so the invitation to all of you is on this Palm Sunday, and for the next week, we get a journey with Jesus. So the way that you can do that as a member of Salem Magley Church is Monday, we have the prayer call. Tuesday, we have the prayer call. Wednesday, we have the prayer call. Certain churches have services every one of those nights. But we just have a prayer call that you can call into for 10 minutes, 8 p.m. Thursday, we do have the Maundy Thursday service, which is the day when we celebrate and remember the Last Supper, when Jesus has a final meal with his disciples. And when he tells them that they now have a new Passover meal, not the old Passover meal with the lamb, but now a new Passover meal. And that Passover meal is him coming to deliver us, to save us from our rebellion and to offer us life. And then Friday, we have Good Friday service. We don't do a Good Friday service here. We just do the one at 1 p.m. I realize that if you can't go to that because it's during the day, that's a problem. I don't know for sure, but I think it will be online. So Decatur Church of God, you can go watch it after the fact. So if you're able to come to that, it's just part of that journey, because the Good Friday, it ends with the crucifixion. And then there's the darkness of Saturday. And then Easter sunrise service when the tomb is found empty and we proclaim that Jesus is resurrected. And then we celebrate with the worship service at 10 a.m. That's the journey that starts today with Jesus' entrance that indicates that he was someone different. He was the Messiah, God's appointed ruler to come and set his people free, and he was to be their true king. So for this Holy Week, I invite you to start this journey with Jesus and to see it all the way through. Because Jesus' entrance indicates that there was something different about him. So let us journey to the end to see what it was.